live.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah, so hello and welcome to the 10100 Conversation. My name, of course, is James, and I would just like to say welcome on behalf of all of us here in the budding rural metropolis of Owen Sound, located snugly in the Elephant's Butt in northern southwestern Ontario. I'm
Yep.
practicing that one.
Super exciting.
You just. We've had quite the week here over the last couple of days. Did you make it out to the Black Lives Matter march?
I did. I was at the one on Wednesday. And then there was another one on Saturday in Wyerton, which I was like, do I go to? But I'm like, how would I get there without violating social distancing rules with like people, like by getting in a vehicle that's not my regular people, because the only other people that have a vehicle really are like, well, my brother does, but it needs work and stuff. So anyway, I didn't make it to the Wyerton one, but the Owen Sound one was absolutely amazing
Wasn't it
and
just
very inspiring. Like there's never been a protest this big in Owen Sound. I'm
right?
sure.
How many people were there? Do you know?
I don't know. When you're
It
in
seemed like
it, like you
hundreds.
see a whole bunch of people in front of you and a whole bunch of people behind you, and you
Yeah,
can't see the end of the line going in either direction. It's like impossible to tell.
right.
Um, it was estimated by other people that sort of witnessed from the side that it was like between 500 and 1,000 people.
I could. It was definitely more than 500.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely more than 500. There was a moment when they called for people to take a knee. They said you don't feel obligated if you don't want to, or if you don't feel comfortable doing it, or if you have problems. And she didn't even finish her sentence,
And everyone
and
was on a
everybody
knee.
was on one knee.
Yeah.
It was just like, whoa, okay, this is clearly like everyone's like, we're in. Like this is what we're doing. This is why we're here. And like my mom wanted to go, but there's no way she could have one done the march or two done the kneel or anything else because she's not mobile enough to do that.
Right.
And
But
there
she
were
was there in spirit,
several
right?
people that like I knew that mentioned that they were there after the fact. That I was like, wait a minute, you were there too.
Right. So I was
I
there.
had no idea.
Right.
Like the most of the time I'm there during the march, I didn't run into anybody I knew. Like maybe one or two people, and then I lost them immediately afterwards.
I saw
And
James.
then
I saw James Menzies.
yes, I
I
saw
saw.
James.
I saw Gavin.
I saw Gavin was like came up behind me when I got there.
I
And then I
saw.
ran into James, and I ran into a couple other people. Um,
Yeah, it was.
like, but then it was like come and go and come and go, and I ran into my hairdresser. Like, I literally before I went to the march, I had time and I didn't know what to do with it. So, and I was so frustrated. It was so hot that I shaved my head and then dyed my hair, and then I ran into my hairdresser.
Right.
I
Oh.
found out like that day that they were reopening on Friday, and I felt so guilty.
Oh
I went
no.
up to her, I'm like, I'm so sorry, Becky. She's like, that's okay. You did a great job, and this gives me some time to work on the people who can't do it themselves. Oh, thank God.
Very
I
good.
felt like such a traitor. Oh,
Oh, but man. Yeah, and I felt so encouraged to go there and see that um, uh, the like just how few people I recognized and how many
yeah.
people were there. I
Yeah.
mean,
I mean, a lot of the time, like, even like Take Back the Night and things like that, it's like you largely the same people, and it amounts to maybe 20 people because that's what a protest in Owen Sound looks like. It's just like
so I'm like
a
20 people at a
spattering
protest.
of people you mostly already know
Yeah,
because this is what you do, and you're the caring folk, and
yeah.
then you go to this thing, and it's like,
Everyone is like, we had to do something. We wanted to be
yeah.
seen to at least be crawling towards the right side of history at a point in
And
time
I
when we could.
hope that people having come out to this will get involved with other causes too when they come along. Not to diminish this one, obviously, but it's like suddenly it's like if you're waking up to the fact that yeah, the world is screwed up, and some of us have been fighting this for a while, and if you're just noticing now how screwed up it is and how important it is that people stand up and do something about it, then like maybe they'll start getting more active and more involved whenever they see something that needs to be fixed, because we need those people, especially like the young. There were so many young people, and I was like, oh, Gen Zers are gonna save us all.
Well, hopefully we can help give them a leg up, which brings me cleverly around to the TOM 100, which of course I've been working on trying to break down some definitions for. So tell me what you think about this. In a nutshell, we're aiming to start with 100 members who are committed to bringing 10 businesses to operational status. No, wait, that was the second part there. The TOM 100 is a mechanism and idea for how to fund and build a network of worker-owned cooperatives that are focused on our local communities and economies. That was the line.
Okay.
Shall I try it again?
Yes, because my head does not stop and think necessarily, oh, it's going to be fun. I'm going back to school, and I'm going to be on Zoom meetings, and I'm going to have to record the whole session, because I'm going to have to sit through it a second time. My brain is still not 100%. It's about 70 to 80.
So I've learned a really neat trick for if you don't want to clog up your computer, you can stream your Zoom meeting as you're having it to your own local YouTube account, and then just make it private, and it will auto back up to your YouTube account, which is what I'm doing right now, kind of. So there, you all now know my big dirty secret.
I hope that they well, I already had a recording pen for when I was in class in person, so that should be interesting. But yes, say it again, or
okay.
Actually be something that to put up on the screen.
Oh,
if you had that capacity.
Sure. Let me. Boom, 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 boom.
It's fun trying to have these discussions with somebody whose brain doesn't work entirely at top notch.
You know what? I get it. Boy, do I get
having a fully functioning brain. I want my high school brain back. I know it was hormonal and stuff, but God, my memory was amazing.
Right? Okay.
I could process so many things at the same time.
So I don't know if you've noticed at all, Laura, but I have surreptitiously empowered you. You are now, of course, the host of this meeting. So
yes.
if anybody wants to join, it's up to you to let them in.
Okay.
And I believe in you.
A little button open then. I've learned how to do that because I hosted the meeting for the first time the other day, and I accidentally deleted the guy and then had to start a whole new meeting.
You know what? Live and learn.
I know how to do it now. I'm not gonna kick people out.
Excellent. High five. Boom. All right. Boom. Yeah, they were okay. That was great. That's going to be deliciously awkward on the YouTube later on. So back to
podcast.
It is, and so this brings us to the part of the discussion where just kind of going over some of the things. About the TOM 100, one of which is how to communicate the idea. So as you can see, I've been working on trying to get some bullet notes here. So this is, for the elevator pitch, the introduction. The TOM 100 is a mechanism and idea for how to fund and build a network of worker-owned cooperatives that are focused on our local communities and economies.
Yes. I would simplify it even more. I would say something like the TOM 100 is a network of smaller cooperatives within a larger cooperative structure.
Hang on.
Yeah. So
is a, what did you say? The network
is a network of smaller cooperatives within a larger cooperative structure.
Yeah. Is a network of smaller cooperatives within a larger cooperative structure. In a nutshell, we are aiming to start with 100 members who are committed to bringing 10 businesses to operational status. Each member pays a fee of $100 a month. This creates a pool of capital that we then use to invest in the business that we all agreed to get, or the businesses, I should say, that we all agreed to get up and running. And this is where I start to get wordy. You can tell this is the last one I was working on before the call started. In turn, the businesses that are funded through the TIM 100 membership fees will form a network of businesses that funnel their surplus back into the capital fund to help get the next series of businesses off the ground. A ratio of the surplus will be split between all the members who contributed to the generation of revenue within the TIM 100 network. And then, if they still haven't walked away at that point, we'll probably have them.
Well, it's one of those things too where you ask somebody like, if they know what cooperatives are first of all,
right,
and how they work, and then you basically say that like, look, we've got a bunch of smaller cooperatives working with a larger cooperative system. Everybody obviously pays into it, and the larger cooperative system determines through voting what the smaller businesses are and how they operate.
True.
And then, like, it's not too wordy, it's not too complicated, and if they need more definitions or understanding about what a cooperative is. So I feel like a lot of your description is describing elements of a cooperative, so I feel like that should be sort of a separate discussion. Make sure they understand what a cooperative is first, and then you just like, okay, well, it's like a cooperative, except it's a cooperative with little cooperatives, and everybody in the top sort of pools money that feeds into the little guys, and we vote on how they're run and like who gets what and what's going on.
Yep.
And then everybody gets paid a living wage and pips and bonuses and all these other great things.
And then we divide the dividends.
Divided.
Yep.
And then they, like, oh, that sounds interesting, blah, 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 blah. And then they're like, what businesses do you have? Because that's always the question they have when we have these conversations.
Oh, which brings us to a very exciting conversation that I had with Lauren last week. I hope your ears were burning because you were mentioned on more than one occasion. Just as somebody with a green thumb, if nothing else.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Well, I mean...
Guard cooperative. I'd love to work for a guard cooperative.
Right. So, so Lauren...
Is that dirt?
Right. So Lauren described this a group that she had been loosely connected with, or knew of, back when she was doing some living in Guelph, Kitchener area. And their business model basically partnered with people who had either front yard space or backyard space that had enough sunlight or enough room to create either tilled land or boxed gardens or this, that, and the other thing, which would then, of course, produce food, and which there was a deal where they worked with the owners of the land. So these are people who own their houses, presumably. Or they would work something with the landlord if the tenant wanted to do a garden there. Presumably. I don't actually know. And unfortunately, Lauren hasn't joined us today, which happens. And then there was a sharing scheme where the people who produced, like offered the land to make the produce, would get a percentage share of what the produce was made. So and I don't know if that was like you get to keep, if you made 12 tomatoes you get to keep 3 or 2 or whatever it would be, or if it was like you would just get like a produce basket, once a week or what have you. Either way, the people who participated in this got something back, and then whatever else was taken during harvest time was taken and sold at local farmers market, and the surplus was then funneled back into the business, which then turned around and reinvested it back into the next year's crop, and you get the idea. So thinking about how that would work within the TIM 100 works really, really well, because you will have a network of laborers whom you don't have to lay off, because there's going to be a period of time at planting season where you're going to need a lot of hands on deck. You're going to need a lot of people who can, if we're making a raised bed garden, who can put one of those together over the course of an afternoon. Maybe get a team of people who that's their job. And this week, or for the next 3 weeks, they're going around to these following lists of address of people that we've contracted with in the local community in order to use their space to produce food, basically. And then we turn around and we have a group of salespeople through the Tim 100 who turn what we produce and sell it to local restaurants, to the IGA, or sell it at the farmers market, on the side of the road, whatever. However we do it. We'll have the people who are either going to be able to set up the deals between us and the IGA, or other local grocery stores. Or we'll have people who will volunteer to be able to, or take shifts, I should say, to sell produce at someplace like the farmer's market on the weekend, and then that would be a paid position. So we talked a lot about that. She's bringing some particularly interesting expertise in that she has a degree, I believe, in botany. So I'll let her correct me on that, but it's right. I know, it's exciting. And one of the other interesting things she was talking about, and I'm not going to steal her thunder on this one, but all I will say is till-less growing, where they don't till the land. Very intriguing, yes. They're apparently
like forest gardening.
I don't know if it's all forest gardening. And again, this is her area of expertise, so I'm not even going to attempt to butcher it. But suffice to say, I was impressed, and it's in last week's YouTube thing there as well. So always worth a listen, I feel. I've gotten halfway through it at least once. Anyway, let me just make sure that I'm thinking of it, that we are in fact and indeed are streaming. Looking great so far, loving it, and nobody is watching, also excellent.
Pressure's off, nobody's watching.
Right? Oh man.
Awesome, that means I'm gonna go get something because I'm a little bit cold. She's usually beside me, but I had like that weird halo thing when I sat down on the other side on my couch.
Oh, right.
I was like, okay, I guess I'm sitting in my armchair. My hair's... I didn't brush my hair today because I was too lazy.
You know what? Anarchists of the world unite.
Yeah, exactly. Who brushes their hair? Well, if I brush it, it'll lose its natural wave. Anyway.
Shoot, what was I saying? Something about,
So botany and forest garden, or not forest gardens, but like untilled land gardens, which intrigues me because as much as I love my garden, and it is like easier for me to keep track of what plants are what, because if it's not growing where I planted it, it's probably
right.
and it looks different. If it looks different than the plants that I know are the ones that I planted, then it's probably a weed, and I'm not going to accidentally that's because I am dumb when it comes to plants. I don't have a degree in botany.
So
that leaf looks different than that leaf. They must be different plants.
So the way she described it, and the way I conceptualized it, and certainly the way I have remembered it, which might not entirely be the way that she described it, so with that caveat out of the way, I pictured a sort of land that you would it's almost like what you would see when you look in a meadow.
Okay.
Where it's, but instead of it being like tall grasses, it would be a medley of precisionally spaced vegetables or produce-producing plants, food-producing plants that create a thick enough ground cover between themselves that no weeds can effectively get between them, and any that do can't effectively take over because they create a little biosphere that has been engineered through expertise by somebody who knows what they're doing. And at that point, you just need to train a small handful of people what to do and how we weed, which is apparently different than traditional weeding methods, and what we do to take care of that. And then you would just need somebody who would take care of like a network, and then over the course of the week, they would be have so many hours that they would be. I hesitate to use the word contracted for, but that's currently the only language I have for it. So they would be, say, 20 hours a week, non-consecutive hours. We just know that this is going to take you 20 hours to do. When you do it, entirely up to you. Very important that it does happen, because otherwise we don't get food, and all of this is for rot, or not, as the case may be. So from that point, let me just make sure. Now that I've changed, ha 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 ha. Sorry, I'm just gonna change this to. So I'm just noticing that as I'm looking at it's a streaming thing here. Now that I've changed Windows, there's a different set of what's the words? The setup changed. I think that's probably the best way I can describe it. Would you care to say something for me?
Say something? Like...
Perfect. Wonderful. I got your levels again.
Okay. I love it when things are that easy.
Excellent. Right, so we would have like somebody who would take care of, say, Owen Sound East, or Owen Sound Northeast, or Owen Sound Northwest. And we would have like a series of homes, presumably in suburbs and such, that we would have turned front yards and backyards into various either raised beds or to lands that have been created using this technique. And then we would have contracted that somebody from the TEM 100 will 3 times a week come into your backyard, make sure everything's watered properly, make sure that everything is weeded properly, make sure everything's growing according to plan, and make sure that the owner of the place is okay with that, and that the person who's coming on location is okay with, feels safe with that environment. The whole rigmarole. We'll have it all set up. Yeah, and so then you would have your teams of people that would just be contracted for 20 hours a week to go around or however many it would be. So if you had, say, 7 gardens, we would figure out how many hours it would be, and between you and the manager, and then you would just 3 times a week do your rounds when it suits you. You know what I'm saying? That's how I conceive of it being set up. That having been said, the reality being, once we get it up and running, presumably the manager and the members who are on the ground doing the work will discover what works best, and will have the tools at their disposal to be able to do what works best in that moment. And if there's another best practice that comes along, or a better idea, they'll be able to work with the manager. The members will be able to work with the manager to set that up. and it may be one of those things where we do things on like a yearly basis sort of thing. So for this year we're doing things this way so that we don't get into a crazy situation where like halfway through the year we all of a sudden change strategies before the first strategy can be given a chance to do whatever it needs to. And that's where an idea about the philosophical discussion about managers and mandates and time frames comes into play, I think. Do you have any thoughts on that?
It's almost like it's almost like a question for later down the road.
Fair.
I find that if and this is something that they taught me also in school, it's a psychological thing, is like the more you think about the logistics of future issues, the less likely you are to take that first step.
Right.
So if you break everything down into, even if you write like a physical list, like the first thing you have to do, the second thing you have to do, and you check them off, as you check them off, you get motivation to do the next things. But as soon as you start thinking about things at the bottom of the list before you finish the stuff at the top of the list, then like you just get overwhelmed and you get, and you're just not motivated to do it. Or you get caught up in all the details and you get scared away, like, oh, this could go wrong, or this could go wrong, or this could go wrong, and like I've been super guilty of that.
Right.
So whereas it is definitely a worthwhile discussion, I think it's a discussion to figure out when we get to that point. Right now we're at where are our entrepreneurs to sign up? Where are our members? Can we get them ready to go? Because things are starting to open up. And they're already, we had Ontario had one new case. And then, things start to open up. Phase 1, but even before Phase 2 was done, I heard a report yesterday that there were 132 new cases in Ontario. So, and that was only partially open status. People are being so stupid. Things are going to shut down again, but I'm hearing things about businesses closing. Time her wellness is closing.
Right.
Jeans is closing.
Right.
And the people who own Norma Jeans, they were apparently thinking about getting into the restaurant business anyway, and so sort of they're out because they felt like retiring because it's been open. So it's more sort of reaching the end of its natural period anyway, and people are sad to see it go.
I mean,
there's a restaurant space open, not a very big one, but
it's something, right?
Big enough for gamers.
Could be. I mean, for my business model, you need to have enough room to put down at least 6 tables of 6 people each, with space and room between them. But then again, that's a business model for a different time and different place, a pre-pandemic, as it were.
Yeah.
So that is certainly open to revision and discussion, as it should be. Nothing is immutable. Least of all I, as my midriff is more than capable of pointing out. Thank you for laughing.
But it's a space that's now open, and you don't have to feel too guilty about taking it over and turning it into something great, because people who were leaving it were already sort of thinking that they were sort of leading to end things. Her wellness, there's somebody who she's losing her business. She's upset about it. If there was a way that she could salvage something, what is she doing now?
I would love to be able to turn, because her wellness wasn't just a sex toy shop. It was an institution. I loved going there just to hang out in the back room, to do meditation exercises, to just feel like you could just tell it was such an inclusive and positive space. And to know the network that it helped form and foster and create within this area, it's going to be missed. I miss it already.
And it wasn't just the sex shop. It also had it's a place where you can go and you can get personal care products as far as like, how to manage your period pain, things like this that like you could go to the drugstore and sort of navigate and figure out and do they have this, but like I missed an opportunity to pick up a couple things because I didn't have the money to buy them at the time, and now it's like, oh shit, I guess I'm gonna have to order them online because there's nowhere else to.
Right?
And that sucks.
Because, like, where else do you take your business in Owen Sound?
Yeah. So, but again, that's another space, and that's an entrepreneur, and that's somebody who might be interested in maybe revamping within a cooperative setting, that maybe she would have more security for future events, because, maybe she's not necessarily ready to end the game. She didn't want her clothes to shop. It just sort of like it had to be closed because she was losing money.
Yeah.
So if you presented her with an opportunity to restart her business, that is somebody that you should contact, add to your list, and be like, hey.
The thought had definitely crossed my mind. I know that she's been particularly busy this past week, so I didn't want to pester her about it.
I would send her a message and just be like, hey, I know you're busy, but when you have a chance, I have an idea that might help you restart your business, and I'm looking for entrepreneurs.
And the truth is,
and then let her call you, or, call her again when she seems less busy and just remind her. But send her, like, open that door.
Because my plan that I have been forming in my brain, my plan of action, I guess, was to get to the point where, and maybe we'll discuss this next because I think it flows nicely, but get to the point where we had like a business plan form, or like a template for what the business plans look like within the 10-100, and a couple of examples of what a 10-100 business plan looks like, so that we can give those, so that when people ask, well, what businesses have you got, we can say, well, we've got, and then we can present the business plans as we have them within the thing.
Yes.
So my plan was,
it's up to the entrepreneurs who want to start their businesses to do that.
so yes, and every entrepreneur will have like a basic conception of what it's going to look like. What we want to know as the 10-100 is, how does their business plan fit within our framework. And
I think that's where, like, you sit down with, like, what business plan are you used to, and here are our basic rules.
yes.
And as far as their business goes, like, give them the freedom to run it as they want, as long as, the workers are paid, and if their business model doesn't pay, can't make that $20 minimum, living wage hours, then they need to tweak it until it does. Like anything, like, these are our qualifications, this is what we stand for, and this is how this works, and if your business model doesn't fit that, then you tweak it to fit that. So it's meaning, like, these are our rules, and this is how it works, and then if you can make it, your business model fit with these rules, you don't necessarily need to come up with a template for them. But we can help them say, okay, what's your business model at the moment? How much were you able to pay your employees? And within this model, since you are getting, shares and tips and whatever stuff, and the way that it's run and the way that it's supported, we can make sure that you pay them that much, kind of thing. And how is it, and where's your order rate coming from? And can you, and I think it's an individual thing. I don't think that's necessarily something we need to micromanage in any way.
Okay. So here's what I was thinking, and you tell me if this goes against your grain, because I was thinking the way our model is set up is we need to know a couple of some very basic things. We need to know the amount of hours, right, that your business that you're planning on doing is going to be open, and the amount of staff that you're going to need during those hours. As I was thinking, if we make up a form for potential business owners that basically asks the following questions, what is the nature of your business? Is it manufacture? Is it service? Is it food services? Is it blah 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 blah? And we can run down the list, and that will sort of give us an idea as to what.
That works on our end for organization, because we're going to need to organize the different businesses and sort out within the staff and the members who goes where and who's working what hours, and that's a necessary thing we need to know.
Yep.
But apart from, so we can ask them questions like that, and we can make sure that and then we can sit down with them with their business model and say, and make sure that it fits, the rules of the 10-100 as far as
call it the service agreement.
The service agreement, kind of like you are paying your employees this much. If you don't,
well, just
then we're gonna know.
by virtue of being a member of the 10-100, technically the 10-100 is going to pay their employees.
Well, then there's no worries there.
Yeah.
Then that's one less expense they need to worry about.
Exactly.
So it's not, you don't even have to worry about how the rest of the business works. You just have to know the basics of what kind of business, how many hours a week each person, blah blah blah, and it's just have them. And that's an easy thing.
Yep. And that's going to create.
That's something you can figure out, because it's one of those learn as you go. So when you get your first, when you get your first entrepreneur, and you're having those discussions, that's when you sort of make notes, because I think that stuff's going to come up when you're talking to them about their business.
Right.
And then you just write down, okay, this, and this, and these are the important things that we definitely need to know, and then go back to that list and then create the form for that. It's going to be a lot easier to do it that way, so that you don't forget anything afterwards. Because otherwise, you're going to come up with a template, and you're going to be filling in little gaps in between the slots yourself. Of, oh shit, I should have asked this, and I should have asked that, and I should have put things in this or whatever. And it'll just become the messiest thing you've ever seen. So create the mess, organize it, and then apply that organizational format to everybody that comes afterwards. Because that way you sort of just let it happen naturally instead of,
Yeah. Would you be open to having a conversation with Sarah and I about this? Because I feel like having you there, you have a certain amount of clarity. Not a certain amount. You have a... I would say that's one of your strengths, and I have a certain amount of ideas, which I would like to think are my strengths, but I also have a certain amount of excess verbiage, which tends to get in the way sometimes, and yeah, so I would love to have a conversation with somebody like Sarah, who I think probably has the expertise and might even be open to having this conversation, although it might be a little too soon right now. I've had,
I don't know, have the conversation.
Yeah,
at
true.
Least you can put it under your belt and say, hey, we've had this conversation, and you're that much further ahead.
Yeah, very true.
You're going to lose by having a conversation sooner than you definitely need to. We definitely need to talk to an entrepreneur. That's our next step. And if you have one sitting there and you don't jump on that and at least have that conversation, then maybe they'll figure it out on their own and you'll miss that opportunity.
And speaking of opportunity, I think this is a great one, because one of the things that I've always wanted to do, and what my hope has been, was that these YouTube things that we're doing would eventually become a kind of resource for other crazy yahoos out there who are dreaming about starting their own cooperative network of businesses, something not unlike the 10-100, and be able to learn from our experiences. So it would be interesting if she would be interested in having that conversation, but also would be interested in having that conversation on this little podcast thing that we do, and hashing it out real time so that people can see us wrestling with it. Because I think there's something powerful about watching that process. Yeah.
Call her. If I'm definitely needed for someone I can definitely lend, the clarity of my brain.
Is that someone told you that you're our everyday Wonder Woman?
No, but thank you. That's encouraging, because I haven't been feeling it lately.
Oh man, I hear that, right? This quarantine has been...
It's a little stressful, but it like, I quit my job because they wanted me back, and I still live with people over 80, and
Yep.
the pandemic isn't over yet. So no.
Right?
If Sir calls and wants their money back, I still live with people over 80, and the pandemic isn't over.
Yep.
So no.
It's nope, it's nope, it's nope, nope, nope.
I'm not killing my grandparents. Thank you. It's not gonna happen. You can't. I want money so badly that you're just like, yeah, steal your grandparents, steal all your family because the economy is more important.
So maybe, yeah. So maybe not next spring.
Excited. You know what? While I have this time, I'm getting the hell out of this. I can't do it.
Yeah.
I will murder the next volatile person that comes in and decides they've had a bad day, and I'm low enough on the social structure that they can get away with treating me like crap. I would absolutely, like, I'm at the point where I would throw something at that. I cannot continuously pretend that I like people who are coming in and treating me like garbage. Like, and I would get fired in a second. It's just like, why did you tell that person something, you know, like, something that I'm not even going to repeat on paper because it was too graphic? And I'm like, they annoyed me.
Have you ever seen the movie SLC Punk?
No.
Okay, add it to your list.
SLC Punk?
Yeah, we'll maybe we'll have a movie night one of these nights after the Zoom call, because like part of my hope and vision for that the 10100 would turn into, like I talk about the fee, the membership fee. We bring it, you know, once a month. The idea would be that, especially as we're getting started, we would meet within the business groups that we hope to be a part of, because every member is going to be committed to at least one of the 10 businesses. And as we are all committed to at least one of those 10 businesses, once a month when it's time for us to bring our membership fee, we gather, right? And it becomes a time of encouraging ourselves with the ideas that we have, that we're going to get this off the ground, or what it's going to look like. And we start chomping at the bit about you know figuring out who amongst us is going to be the manager. Like, is this business, when we get going, like, do we need more than one manager? Do we need like how much of the workload is going to be like? So these are all the sorts of things that I was going to say fantasize about. I don't know if that's the right word, or if that's just incredibly sad. You know.
I was thinking, here's an important point that has come up with talking to people, is that people say, well, what if you can't pay the $100 fee? And like, that's a monthly fee, and you have to pay it, and not everybody can afford that. And I'm like, if you're part of the 10100, you're making more than enough money to be able to afford that.
And I mean, that's the whole goal. But the reality is, for the first 3 months, at the very least, we're not going to have... none of us are going to be working for a 10100 business, because we're going to be starting at $0. And so we're... and even then, after 3 months, we're only going to have 30 grand. Probably not enough to get a business off the ground, realistically. We're going to want to have at least an entire month's of operating budget in the bank, sitting there waiting to be spent, in case customers don't show up and replenish our bank account, right? We need to have that sort of stuff sitting there, in my mind, so that we can afford to lose money for 3 months, in case nobody shows up, and still be able to be there in the following 3 months. And that's what this whole setup of us, 100 of us bringing $100 a month each, creating that constant flow of cash, irrespective of whether or not we get customers, that's going to guarantee that there's going to be at least something, some blood within the machine to keep it moving, to keep it pumping, to keep us moving forward until we can get to the point when we can get customers, where we can get money in the bank account, bums in seats, people moving, whatever it is that our model is for whichever business we got up and running. We just got to keep things going long enough.
The only issue I have with that at that point is that if you have 100 people and they all need to pay. So that's $300 at least because it's $300. It's $100 a month.
Yeah.
So it's $300 people have to pull out of their ass. So where are they getting that from if it's not supported by the like once everything gets running and you join the 10-100, then it's not a worry that you have a $100 fee. But when you first getting started, it's one of those things where it's like
you're scrimping and saving, as a wage slave, which is, it's the same place. Like, where does your coffee money come from this month? Where does your, TV money come from? Where does...
I think that's going to be a harder sell.
100%.
Because that's something that, so like the first payment, I think that's why the first business needs to be one that is high profit and low startup cost. And I think that's something that, like, really low startup cost, like somebody's garage.
Yeah.
Or, the garden thing.
Mm-hmm.
But the garden thing, you have to wait for the plants to grow.
Yeah, the garden thing is probably going to be a year 3 deal. We're probably going to have a season or two of us starting up these other smaller businesses that we can do out of garages and such.
So it definitely needs to. So whatever you do, the first business, and this is something that like everybody needs to be able to benefit from,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why I think it's difficult to start the 10-100 as like a full 10-100. It's like you might have to start the 10-100 with one business.
Oh yes, yeah, 100%.
Without like 100 people being members, but like. Because that's the thing, it's like to get that many people committed to something that, like they're pitching in $100 but they're not getting paid.
Right. So what essentially we're asking people to do is to become members and to view their membership fees as investment into a business, because that's exactly what it is. And we're asking for a commitment of, 12 grand a year. 12 grand? 1200 a year, per member, and that is a big ask, but it's also a big investment. And without the 100 people, we don't get the critical mass of investment that allows us to plant the businesses. So it's kind of it's that sweet spot where 100 people is manageable. 10 businesses, also manageable, in my mind, in my crazy imagination, because I'm also thinking about this coming as somebody who was trained to be a church planter, and the ideal church planting size is somewhere between 200 and 500 people. When you hit that point, that's when you start getting bigger. Things become, you have to do things differently. There's a whole whatever. Point of the matter is,
I think that's another thing that then, if you're approaching people, it's tough to approach like somebody like myself. Like I'm going back to school. I'm going to be living on OSAP.
Right.
I can't guarantee $100 a month.
No. But we're not collecting money right now. We're collecting people and commitments.
But when it does come down to it, if I'm still a student, and that's 3 months before I might see money back. So we might not be like getting the money now, or like, but even when we do starting it, you're asking people who might not have the money to give the money. So there needs to be a way to or appeal to people who can spare it, but they're the ones that are already like doing okay and they don't need to worry about it. So maybe like there needs to be like a moral pitch
and an educational pitch. It's a way of saying like, and it's the idea that I think we all have, especially those of us at the lower income scale. Like at the end of the month, we usually find the money we need for the things that we really want. You know what I mean?
When I was
Sometimes.
living on OSAP, every single year that I have lived on OSAP, I have had to ration food.
Right.
So
OSAP is not a good way to live. Shit.
No, it's not. Thankfully, where I'm living right now, I'm on really cheap rent.
Yeah, yeah.
Because my landlords are my grandparents.
Bless them.
And and I help them around the place and all the rest of it. It's part of the deal.
Mhm.
But even $500 a month, I could sort of manage. I could sort of doing okay, and that's like rent, like $500 a month for rent, and
Yep.
it's still okay, but I was still tight.
Yeah.
I still had to budget like crazy. And most places are 700 plus, and like,
Right.
and when first, oh my god, like, I went into so much debt borrowing money from people because I was trying to get through my exams on no food.
Shit.
I wasn't eating. When I was in college, I was interning at the CBC and living off the Tic Tacs that I found in the bottom of my purse. I'm not exaggerating.
Oh my God. Laura, you could write a book.
I could. I absolutely could. So when I say that, like, I'm somebody that if I'm in school, I might not be able to spare $100 a month.
Right.
Like, there are people that are considered poor that live below the poverty line that can spare $100 a month if
Okay.
they scrimp and save. And then there's me, who I go into a financial advising office and they look at my finances and they wonder how I'm still alive.
So, right? Well, I mean, the answer is because you're
I can
awesome.
afford, like, right now I can afford, like,
Dirt.
$10 for 3 months worth of hair dye. And that's, just a product of I need something to keep me happy.
Yeah.
I don't shop anywhere other than secondhand stores.
Okay. So I'm in the same boat.
This is the level that we're dealing with, where it's like, if you're asking people $400 a month, that's a lot to some people.
And
people living
no,
on
it is
PSP,
absolutely a
that's
lot.
a lot.
And I don't know if you remember the conversation that my friend Michael and I had that I mentioned that I was going to have. I don't know if I brought it up on stream, but one of the key takeaways is this point entirely. It is a lot, and so I'm thinking about it, and I'm wondering, okay, so how do we take care of that? And I think there might be something that's built inherently in the structure that might help us out, because we're building around 10 people's business ideas. And assuming that everybody who has a business idea also has a small network of people, of friends, that they're thinking that they would love to do this business with, we're already going to have inbuilt networks of people that are already kind of going to want to have each other's back to begin with. So I'm thinking now in our particular case, because we're in the same boat, you, me, John, and we also happen to be a part of the same band. So it would make sense for me that in our particular case, in order to, if you're in school and John and I are, on ODSP or whatever it is, and we're trying to figure out how we're going to come up with our $100 for that particular month.
To raise money.
Exactly. 100%. 100%. That's how we would do it. And we would encourage other groups of other people who are in very similar situations to, within their groups and businesses, to do the exact same thing. And believe it or not, this is kind of inspired by Genghis Khan and how he organized his army, where he broke his entire army up into groups of, I think it's somewhere between 10 and 20 men. It was less than 20. And he did that for his entire army. And then all he did was he told each individual army, like each individual group commander, where they needed to show up and when. And then he just left it to them as to how they were going to get there. And each person within those little platoons had a job that they did in order to keep things going. But it was all very sort of like, you get to an area, somebody cooks the food, somebody does the camp, another person tells the stories to entertain everybody, that sort of thing. And
Shoddy entertainer.
And I'm gonna have to link the thing on the Mongols, because it was particularly interesting to learn how they did it. but part of the key is that they were small and modular, and each individual group was its own independent unit that was responsible for looking after itself, basically. And so instead of one general being responsible for 10,000 troops and how they're all getting fed and where they're all sleeping tonight, you had one person who was in charge of 20 people and figuring out, or 10 people, figuring out where they were sleeping that night and where they were getting food. A lot easier, potentially. And then, so similar sort of idea. And then we would just create a network of mutual support for each other. So if we find out that one group is struggling to come up with their $100 this month, then we cross-promote, that sort of thing. And if any of us have any extra money left over, hell, this can be a way for people who are joining the TIM 100 who are in a better position to give to potentially more to the community or the thing there. I'm thinking like a church person now. Anyway, hey?
Hey, wealthy people who are joining the TIM 100, how would you like to sponsor a poor person who wants to join but has no freaking cash at all?
In a way, come to a concert. I mean, what were you going to do on Thursday night anyways, right?
Yeah.
And if you got the cash and you don't mind it going to support local artists in a way, this is a very practical way to do it. Yeah, so just some thoughts.
Yeah. Because there definitely needs to be something to work around that, because if I'm still in school, and I probably will be, assuming that all my courses, because now they're doing online courses that they didn't offer before, so I might actually be able to take my psychology major, because none of those courses were available.
High five! There it is.
That would be awesome. I can get my freaking degree. I want my freaking degree.
Right. And if you could get your freaking degree while staying in Owen Sound, because you could do everything online.
Yeah. And I don't have to try and find a place in Peterborough. I mean, not that I hated Peterborough. I actually kind of miss it. It was kind of fun. And oh my god, the campus.
Right.
The campus was this like...
Right.
It's like when... It's like when people described the Garden of Eden with its... I mean, there were fewer plants and animals, but, like, the ground structure and the multi-leveledness and, like, just, like, the stone and the grasses and the trees and the architecture, and it was just, like... And the river going through it and the bridge, and and it's surrounded by forests and nature, and it's just beautiful.
Right?
And I missed it so much. But yeah, I gotta be practical about these things. I think my goal, I need to downgrade my stuff, like downsize my belongings big time to like just my hobbies and like my art collection. But any like extra knickknacks, which is gonna be hard because most things in my house are things I use. I've already downgraded. It's like, oh, do I get rid of my weights? No, I use my weights. Do I get rid of my games? No, I want to have people over for games. Do I get rid of my books?
Are you kidding me? You love your books. All right, that's it. We're getting rid of clothes.
My bookshelf, maybe not.
No. I says that's it. We're getting rid of clothes. I always hated. It doesn't matter.
I do need to get rid of clothes, especially now that I've determined like certain things that like I'm not going back into this industry, or this industry ever again. I need to get rid of the wardrobes that I accumulated for those.
Right.
Out.
Oh man. Well, it's 6:10. I just want to read a little bit of the book because I think it's great. We had an awesome discussion last week, Lauren and I. Talking about the humanizing the economy. We finished The Grand Delusion last week, and can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. In that case, We now have reached that point in time in today's discussion where we are reading Humanizing the Economy, Cooperatives in the Age of Capital by John Ristakis. We're doing chapter 2 this week. Not the whole thing, because that would be ridiculous. But we are starting with the beginning, the materialization of dreams. Here's a quote by George Jacob Holyoake. England is a chopping machine, and the poor man is always under the knife. When Robert Owen was assigned by the British House of Commons to coordinate the Parliamentary Commission of Inquiry into the application of the Poor Laws of 1817, England was caught up in a transformation that was cutting loose the social moorings of an entire class in the name of progress. The small landholders of England, the English countryside, evicted by enclosures from the land that had been used in common for centuries, were descending on the cities in the thousands to seek work in factories and mills of the nation. Entire villages were depopulated as common land was turned over to raising sheep or large-scale farming that was more profitable to landowners. At the same time, the artisans and craftsmen of towns who were watching their livelihoods disappear as machine production used unskilled labor to replace the human skills that had been the foundation of the traditional craft economy. The destitution and misery that accompanied this process was on a scale unlike anything seen before. It was the time of Dickens, the poorhouse, child labor, stalking hunger, and the swelling, festering slums populated by the displaced and the dispossessed. The Age of Revolt. These were the years the modern workers' movement was born. In the years following the end of the Napoleonic Wars and culminating in 1848, a wave of revolution swept over Europe. In England, in particular, the great social uprising of the Luddite movement that erupted episodically from 1808 to the 1830s involved hundreds of thousands in the struggling to turn back the social wreckage prompted by automated production in the textile industry. At its height, the revolt was so strong and so well organized, 12,000 men-at-arms were needed to put it down in a series of bloody battles. The popular impulse for social reform in these years also crystallized in other, quite distinct forms. In the demand for popular suffrage by the Chartists? In the first stirrings of the movement for the women's rights, and in the many workers' education and self-improvement societies that for the first time provided workers with the ideas and the organizational means to frame their own future and establish the foundations for an organized labor movement. A further outcome of these societies was their coalescence into the cooperative movement, given form and direction by the work and teachings of figures like Robert Owen, William Thompson, and William King. Robert Owen was already well known as a successful industrialist, one of the most prosperous men in England, but even better known for his advocacy of reforms to alleviate the desperate conditions of the poor. His charge for the British House of Commons was to report on these conditions and on the ways and means of addressing a host of afflictions that immiserated such a huge percentage of the English population. It was to be a turning point in the long and bitter struggle for social and economic reform in that country. Owen was an improbable revolutionary. The son of a saddler and ironmonger, he was born in Newton, Wales, and at the age of 10 was sent by his father to work as a draper's apprentice in Lincolnshire. At age 16, he moved to Manchester to work in a large drapery firm, and by the age of 21, he was a manager in one of Manchester's largest spinning factories. A model of the self-made man, Robert Owen seemed destined to pursue the conventional destiny of a gifted and ambitious businessman caught up in the full flow of England's Industrial Revolution. Owen had earned his reputation as a reformer by pouring his substantial wealth into the improvement of the nation's underclass and lending his unquenchable energy to a host of causes, including the creation of Britain's first labor organizations, the reform of child labor laws, the movement for universal suffrage, the creation of Britain's earliest childcare system. And the creation of Britain's earliest childcare system. But it was in his Report on the Poor that Owens first outlined a comprehensive vision for a revolutionary reform of Britain's economic and social order as the only means of addressing the endemic social ills that accompanied the capitalism of his era. The report he drafted centered on the creation of, quote, villages of cooperation, end quote, as the means to end poverty. And while his report was rejected by the House of Commons, its cooperative ideals crystallized a movement that at its height spread through the length and breadth of the entire nation. Owen's ideal socialist society was based on the establishment of cooperative communities and on the conviction that man's character was a product of his circumstances. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Good. His communitarian plans were encouraged by the success of Shaker communities that 40 years earlier had taken root in the United States as an offshoot of a small band of dissenting Quakers who were at the time disseminating their egalitarian teachings in Manchester. Owen believed the essential goodness of man was corrupted by the harsh ways in which he was treated and the dehumanizing effects of inhumane environments. In this, he was close to the French Enlightenment philosopher Rousseau. But instead of rejecting civilization as a corrupting influence on man's nature, Owen's solution was to create the external conditions that would remake human character and produce good, rational, and humane people. More importantly, Owen linked the social formation of character to an economic model in which the social element was paramount. He refused to accept the division of society into an economic and political sphere, and the social nature of the solution he proposed set him apart from his contemporaries. Robert Owen saw in cooperation the key to both wealth creation and a just society. Unlike latter Marxism, cooperativism did not reject the market as a source of social evil. Instead, Owen saw in cooperation a means of using the market to meet the needs of all members of society, not just the privileged few. As owner of Britain's largest spinning business, the Corton Twist Company, located in New Lanark, Scotland, he had the perfect opportunity to act on his ideas. Owen sought not just to run a successful business, but to create a new type of community. Owen's first concern was the molding of character through transformative power of humanistic education. The creation of cooperative communities and humane workplaces was an extension of this primary principle. It was also the foundation for one of Owen's most signal contributions to England's social and cultural development, the rise of education, especially among adults, as a mechanism of social change. When he arrived in New Lanark in January of 1810, over 2,000 people lived in the village. Among his first decisions, Owen ordered the building of a school and limiting the workday for children. He also refused to employ children under the age of 10. At the time, children as young as 5 were working in textile mills, for context. 500 of these children had been taken from the poorhouses, primarily in Edinburgh and Glasgow, to work in the New Lanark mills. It was common practice for poorhouses to provide factory owners a regular supply of this cheap labor to ensure employment for all their wards, children included, in order to prevent them falling into vicious habits, including induced by idleness.
It's amazing to me the idea that like a country that considers itself civilized will have children working in factories.
Yeah.
And like they're out conquering the world and like taking over the place, like they know what they're doing, and they have children in their own country working in factories. Like that just boggles the mind.
Yeah. I mean, might makes right, right?
Yeah. Ugh.
This hateful philosophy was only one of the enduring evils promulgated by Methodism at the time. Stunted many with deformed limbs, children were on their feet 13 hours a day, often sleeping beside the machines they served. One harrowing explanation for the appalling infant mortality rate amongst the working poor during this period, upwards of 50% for children to the age of 5, was the characteristic deformation and narrowing of the pelvic bones in girls who had worked since childhood in the mills. After serving an apprenticeship of 6, 7, 8 years, they were turned loose, uneducated, untrained, to take up their place in Britain's permanent underclass. Owen had hoped that his treatment of children and the other reforms he introduced at New Lanark, including a pension scheme for workers, would induce other industrialists to follow suit, and he campaigned vigorously to promote his ideas. He was an indefatigable propagandist. Sorry, it was hyphenated in a very weird way. He was an indefatigable propagandist. Yet he did not succeed. His courting of powerful patrons and governments across Europe was to no avail, and his belief that the rich would eventually support his plans for the alleviation of poverty through cooperative communities proved entirely groundless. It was a product of an almost childlike faith in the persuasive power of reason and an almost total absence of political acumen. Owen had not an ounce of aptitude for political reality. As E.P. Thompson remarked in his treatment of Owen's role in this period, Owen simply had a vacant place in his mind where most other men had political responses. Moreover, his attempts to engineer model cooperative communities from the standpoint of benevolent patriarch drew suspicion and ridicule from many critics, some charging him for being a dangerous radical and a menace, others for not being radical enough. This was a time, let us remember, when the popular temper was long past expecting any favors from the rich. Among these later critics was William Thompson, a fellow reformer and political philosopher who, even more than Owen, helped establish the intellectual foundations of the cooperative movement and early socialism. Today, Thompson is an obscure figure, someone whose achievements have been largely lost to the mists of time, but in his day his influence was profound. His writings, in particular, an inquiry into the principles of distribution of wealth most conducive to human happiness, written in 1824 when he was already 50, are among the foundational stones of socialism. Thompson was born in 1775 in Cork, Ireland, a son and heir to one of the most prosperous merchants in the Anglo-Irish aristocracy. After his father's death in 1814, Thompson inherited a trading fleet and a landed estate in Glendore, West Cork, where he promptly rejected the role of absentee landlord. He moved on to the estate and worked to improve the living conditions of the tenant families, educating the children, and introducing innovations in agriculture. In this, he recalls the figure of Leo Tolstoy, who attempted the same on his own estates in Russia a short time later. The parallels between the two even extend to Thompson's attempts to leave his property to the cooperative movement after his death, prompting the longest legal battle in Irish history as other branches of his family fought to have the will annulled. Like Owen, Thompson was a friend and disciple of Jeremy Bentham, but his approach to utilitarianism and the problem of human happiness was entirely different. Unlike Bentham, Thomson saw happiness as a social phenomenon, not a personal pursuit. It arose as a consequence of specific social conditions and from the nature of one's relations with others. And whereas Bentham defended the private property and social hierarchy as preconditions to liberty and security, Thomson was a fierce critic of capitalism and all forms of subordination. He argued for the principle of common property, claiming that private property was the basis of competition and the mechanism by which one person is pitted against the other. For Thomson, the key to a just society and to personal happiness was the alignment of self-interest with the interests of society, not the subordination of one to the other. But unlike Bentham and Owen, Thomson fought for the practice of the participatory democracy in social institutions. In this, Thomson was a prophetic forerunner of contemporary theorists of social capital. His explicit linking of happiness with social relations and both with cooperation and the extension of democratic practice established the moral and methodological foundations for a modern understanding of cooperation as a remedy to the corrosive effects of capitalism. These are the key themes that we will explore in the concluding sections of this work. By the time of his death from a chest affliction in the age of 58, Thomson's influence inside the cooperative movement had grown steadily and was beginning to overshadow that of Owen himself. Their differences, particularly on the question of democratic practice and Thomson's belief that the workers in cooperative communities should have ownership and control of the community's land and capital property, led Thomson to distinguish his more radical views from that of other Owenites by adopting the term socialist. Thomson's use of socialist in a letter to the Cooperative Magazine in 1827 is the first documented use of the term. At the time, the rise of cooperative communities of one form or another was not restricted to Owen's experiment at New Lanark. Dozens had come into existence, both in England and abroad, brought into being by a common impulse to forge an alternative and a growing class of consciousness and self-confidence on the part of working people. All attempted to realize some socialized form of the ideal community. Eventually, all failed, including Owen's own efforts to extend the New Lanark model to new cooperative community called New Harmony in Indiana. Why did all these efforts fail? In Owen's case, failure resulted both from the paternalistic and indeed authoritarian nature of his model and his philosophy of human nature. His cast of mind is illustrated in the tone of his writings, noted here. He wished, he said in 1817, to, quote, remoralize the lower orders, and the words most encountered in his early writings are benevolent and provided for them. It would be hard to find a tone more perfectly calibrated to annoy the radicals and the leaders of the emerging trade union movement. The notion of the working class advancing by its own efforts towards its own goals was alien to Owen, even though he was eventually to find himself at the head of precisely such a movement. Owen's cooperative communities depended on his personal prestige, presence, and philanthropic support. In New Harmony, when he left the leadership of the community in the hands of his son Robert Dale Owen, the community came apart, showing the degree to which his success was dependent on his own considerable leadership gifts and charisma. The second cause of failure was a fundamental flaw in Owen's philosophy. People are not simply passive creatures of circumstance. They are not born as blank slates. They carry something of their own into the world, and the individuality of the person is ultimately the interplay between what is socially and environmentally, They carry something of their own into the world, and the individuality of the person is ultimately the interplay between what is social and environmental and what is inherent. Owen deserves great credit for understanding that the contribution of environment, education, and humane treatment to the formation of character. Unfortunately, his optimism concerning the effects of environment on people wasn't enough to overcome the differences and divisions amongst incompatible individuals that eventually undermined new harmony. Nevertheless, his cooperative experiments helped to consolidate and give form to the new movement. The third cause of failure was more prosaic: a simple lack of practical experience in the operation and management of cooperative enterprises. A great many of the cooperative societies that preceded the first six at Rochdale, estimated at some 250 in 1830, founded on the mishandling of credit, a natural effect flowing from the propensity of those societies to extend credit to members who either had no money or had very little incentive to repay their loans. Another problem was the utter absence of any legal recognition or protection for the cooperative as a legal entity. Its funding could then be embezzled by anybody with total impunity. The legal obstacles to success were in themselves enormous. Despite these weaknesses and setbacks, Owen's ideas proved something indispensable to the rise of organized working class movement for reform, the formulation of an organized system of thought, a social theory that could offer a countervision to the capitalism of this time. Owenism was the first of the great social doctrines to grip the imagination of the masses in this period, both embracing and recasting the industrial epoch. What was at issue, quote, was not the machine so much as the profit motive, not the size of the industrial enterprise, but the control of the social capital behind it, end quote. Owen's ideas were general and imprecise, but they lent themselves to adaptation and innovation. From their stock, countless working-class efforts were able to adapt the key notions of cooperation and self-help to suit their own purposes. Owenism, that great tide of economic and social reform that swept across England, in the end came to signify far more than Owen. Many working people had ideas about what needed to be done and took the initiative in their hands. Owen reflected this ferment and championed reform in polite society. But on the ground, cooperatives were among the most enduring creations of the workers themselves. And that brings us to the end of the first part of Chapter 3.
Nice.
That brings us to the end of the first part of Chapter 2.
I was thinking about how I think I learned a little bit about Owen on a YouTube video, but not to that degree. Just as a basic, this person was one of the people who, back in the day tried to help people and everything. It's interesting to I feel like without those early people, even through their failures, this is the thing people look about when it comes to political systems and economic systems, is if it doesn't work the first time, they assume that it's bunk.
Although, what's really interesting, and this is a boon for us, the statistics and the data that we have for cooperatives in Canada is that they are more than 50% likely to survive the first 7 years of business than a traditional capitalist-based enterprise is.
Easy, yeah, because they're supported within themselves, whereas capitalist system, it's one person versus the world.
And it's one person who has to shoulder the responsibility of the entire thing. Yeah. So they're the one that are on the hook to make sure that there is something to sell to customers.
So much pressure. And that's something that, the capitalist mindset, where it's you gotta pay your dues if you're gonna be a millionaire someday, blah, 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 blah. It's just it's so telling of their inherent selfishness and, lack of cooperation on any level with other people.
Yeah.
It's like that they, you don't get help. You don't get to ask or work or whatever for help. You don't get cooperation. You don't, you have to build everything. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And
Never mind the fact that you don't got no boots and you don't got no straps.
yeah, the people that succeed typically, like the ones that get really big, like they're trust fund babies, or at the very least, they come from middle income homes, if not rich people's homes. Like, it's how many people do you know that, like, like a kid who grew up on the streets, abandoned by their parents, or were in an abusive household and had to escape on and lived on the streets, and then they somehow made it through school, and somehow they figured a way to like get to the library and apply for funding so they could go to post secondary and moved into residence, and somehow were able to like budget and all this stuff all on their own. Like, it's
I mean, statistically, they do exist.
like, oh, the opportunities are always there for everybody, and nobody has an excuse to not succeed in life. And then you look at people, like the realistic suffering of people in the world, and you're like, okay, easy for you to say. Your parents gave you like had an education fund for you. Or if they didn't, you at least didn't have, like, you weren't dealing with severe mental illness or trauma or, all these other things. Like, there's a million things that, like, they don't, like, they're, oh, yeah, it should be easy for everybody. And it's like,
Yeah.
no, it's just not. And that's a problem. The fact that we live in such a rich country and anybody is homeless is, frankly, a national embarrassment.
There was a beautiful meme that, do you know my friend Jesse Hodgson? Anyway,
I think so.
he's, were you ever a part of T-Cow? Have I asked you that before?
And for
Okay, so that would be, it was
I'm
a,
not good with short forms.
oh,
I'm not
T-Cow,
good. Like, if you, I mean, I forget.
it was
I only
a,
last year memorized the short form for Lord of the Rings.
right, I
So,
remember. Right, true. It was always just that acronym. I happen to know
oh,
what the acronym stands for, but I'm sworn to secrecy on it. So nobody knew what TCAL stood for except for a few of us. But it was an online forum that we used to all be a part of way back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And there was
oh
a big,
God,
huge community of
I
us in No One
was
Sound.
a preteen at that time.
Yeah,
So,
true, true.
no wonder I'm not familiar. I was like, is that a Facebook group? Like a fan page for
No, we
something?
existed
No.
way before. This is what we did before the days of social media. This is when
I
AOL
mean,
was
I
still a
had a
thing.
MySpace page. I'm old enough to have known what MySpace and MSN Messenger, you know,
I'm old. Did you
I
ever have
know.
ICQ? Oh
Uh,
God.
I
All right.
remember what dial-up sounds like.
All right. Yeah, no, it's yeah, but this is good though because before we're done, we're gonna have people that are like retirement age part of all this. I'm hoping to have a bunch of kiddies coming out of like high school to be a part of all this, so that they're getting invested in something that's going to be setting aside for like, because like the Town 100 is going to have education built into it. It's going to have housing. It's going to have retirement plans. It's going to have all of it. Knock on the wood. And yeah, because there is a definite there's a roadmap, and we'll get into this at future dates, I'm sure. But having a multi-generational, spread out geographically across the Grey Bruce, like I was thinking, like you could almost have I was getting to thinking, like, how many 10100 networks could you have operating in an area like this? And then I got to thinking, like, how many people work in this area already? You know? Like, how many jobs are there in this area? I mean, what's to say
How
that...
many places are like such crappy places to work that they can't keep staff and they just keep rotating them? So that's like a whole bunch of people that are constantly in and out of work. Hey.
Yeah, right?
Well, I had a bunch of jobs that I really did like too, and I would have liked if they continued, but they
Yeah.
didn't, and they disappeared under my feet. That's the other thing.
Right? I mean,
It's
they
either
always...
a job that treats you like crap, and then you're just like, how are you still staffed at all? How does anybody come in here and apply? Unless, like, they just don't know, and then they leave within a week. And, like, literally there are places that cannot keep people for more than a week or so at a time.
Oh, yeah.
And then there are the places that are like, they're so good to work for, and then they just disintegrate. And, you know, like, I'm not that much of a conspiracy theorist, but there's something wrong there.
Yeah, because I would imagine the people that are good to work for are also people who are ethical with regards to their staff.
Yeah.
And when your profit margins are so are built upon cutting like the profit margin out of the wage or the labor of your staff by underpaying them or paying them as little as you can legally get away with paying them. And yeah, I don't know, I'm beginning to
Yeah,
hit a wall.
it's that delicate line. And the least little thing happens, and there's less protection for them. And this is the stupid thing about this too, is that they say that if you raise minimum wage, the cost of living is just going to go up to meet it, and it's like, but it doesn't have to. Because if you think about it, you just have to wait a couple weeks for the person's next paycheck, maybe a month for a couple paychecks for them to get caught up on finances with their new pay, and then they're going to go out and they're going to, because they're making more money, they're going to be like, I'm going to celebrate, I'm going to go out to dinner.
Right?
I'm going to go and buy that thing that I couldn't afford, but now I have the money to buy it. So the amount of people that are actually out shopping and spending money and contributing to the economy is going to go up because people aren't sitting there rationing their food because they have so little money to play with.
It's
so
disposable income.
Like, I can't afford to pay my staff a living wage. You're like, but if everybody pays their staff a living wage and keeps the cost of living at the same level on par with the living wage, then more people will go shopping.
You got it.
And will make more money, which will then account for the increased cost of the labor. Why is this so hard to understand? It seems so simple to me. And then I look at people who, like, they're economists. It's their job to play with money, and they can't grasp this. They can't understand this as a general concept. It's like, how do I know this and you don't? Like, why are you guys the ones out there messing it up? And, like, I'm looking at this like, hello, basic math, and I'm not even good at math. But it's so simple.
Right?
It's so simple conceptually. Like, a child could understand this. And it's like they're just looking for an excuse to just not pay people enough money to live on. Like, they want, they profit from poverty. It's like, not at this level of poverty. You're not gonna sell random stupid trinkets at, like, the price you want to sell them if people don't have the money to buy it, which I guess is why so many places are going, like, cheaper, crappier product.
Oh, yeah.
More different places, all this other nonsense is just a way to be like, oh, this is stuff the poor people can buy to pretend they're wealthier.
Well, and the fact that you also, when you do a premium production line, like, inevitably, you'll have, like, it was explained to me that if you do a run of 100 product, whatever it is, 70% of that product will be passable.
Yeah.
The other 30%, some of it will be almost passable. Like it would be real. You could do it, but it might not work. It might not look great. There might be some
Yeah.
cosmetic issues with it, or maybe there's a spelling mistake, and those are all the things that end up at our basically at our dollar stores. They're repackaged, repurposed, and sold off as like the second or third tier versions of stuff that would otherwise just be like thrown away as waste
Yeah.
product.
Which, on one hand, you're just diminishing waste, which, no complaints there. But at the same time, it's like people can't afford quality products that last. So I think there's a whole market. Like there's an industry out there where where factories where they intentionally they just make subpar product to sell at low cost.
Yep.
It's meant to be disposable, like the built-in obsolescence and things like that, where these companies have to continue to make money, so therefore they make the product break sooner, so that you have to buy more, and then by keeping people at a lower wage, they can't afford to buy the stuff that doesn't break.
Right.
You've got people who can't afford to keep buying new stuff, but you're keeping them poor enough that that's all that they can afford. Like they can't, like they could try saving up for the more expensive thing, but it's like if you need a vacuum cleaner, you need a vacuum cleaner.
Right.
It's not something that you can be like, oh, I'll just wait a year and not vacuum my place until I can afford the vacuum cleaner that won't break.
Right.
Like, there's a thing. That's the thing. So I'm wondering, like, if maintaining poverty is part of the plan, as far as from a capitalist perspective.
I think so, because if they keep everything artificially low, none of us can collect like $100 a month to set aside to like start our own businesses. Number
Yeah.
one, and number two, if they're all that low, then it doesn't matter which job you go to, it's not going to be enough, and you're always going to be in a position where it's you just have to accept what is being given. Because they just do it as a matter of, I don't think they're all getting together. I don't think Wendy's, McDonald's, or any other major fast food restaurant chains are all getting together and agreeing that they're going to, all, hire everybody at the same low wage. I think they're just doing it. They just figure it. They
Yeah.
just find out.
Well, they're
Yeah.
cheap. So how low? Oh, we only have to pay these people this much. Okay, well then why would we pay them more?
Yeah.
They're and again it's because it's people who have all this extra money that they don't understand how little money they're actually paying, and like so these people are being paid this and they figure, oh, you're making this much money and it's minimum wage, so therefore you should be able to live on it, why aren't you just budgeting better, blah 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 blah. And it's like, have you ever tried living on this?
Have you ever had 26% of your wage reduced for taxes and then tried to live on the minimum wage after?
Exactly. It's like, guys, do the math. And like they're so disconnected.
What is
All
it?
they're looking for is profit margins and making it. But it does. There is a part of me that's wondering, like, because there are some like lobbyists, whether this has crossed lobbyists' mind as far as capitalists as a system, as the construction of the system and an adaptation to the fact that like if a company doesn't make as much money one year as it did the previous year, it's considered negative income.
Right. Just because it didn't make as much profit,
Yeah.
it still made a profit, but not as much.
And it's not even making more. They have to at least make twice as much more before it's considered. And it's so stupid. Like, you can't.
Oh my
For it's like,
goodness.
oh, you didn't make at least twice as much more as you did the previous year, so you're not doing very well, or you're on the verge of bankruptcy. It's like, that shouldn't be your basis for on the verge of bankruptcy. Like, you have billions upon billions of dollars.
what is it?
Why are you considering bankruptcy just because you didn't make his like the same level of ridiculous? And
But
it's just this stupidity and this ideology where they believe that their employees just don't deserve as much, so they give the bonuses to people who don't need it.
yeah,
You know, this will help you. Why don't you take this bonus and hide it in an offshore account? It's like, well, you made all this extra money. Why can't you up the pay for the working, for like the people who are like, without the people working in Amazon's distribution centers,
right.
Amazon as a distribution system does not exist. If they all walked out, he's fucked.
Right.
If nobody else came in and was a total scab,
But here's the thing.
take those jobs.
Here's the thing. If they all walked out, he would just turn around and hire in the next batch of people who are desperate and hungry. And
Yeah.
that's the world that
And
he's
that's what he
created.
does. That's
Yeah.
what happens. Is that
Yeah.
so many people don't work there for very long, and he just
Yeah.
keeps doing it and doing it and doing it and doing it.
So
And
what
it's just-
yeah. And so what we're going to do is we're going to create an alternative. We're going to get people to go work
Yeah.
for him, set aside $100 a month, and then quit en masse and come work for our online distribution warehouse network, you know?
Yeah, I wonder if we can do that. Can we do that as a distribution network based on a cooperative?
Oh, sure. I mean, there's literally nothing that we couldn't do with this particular model.
Yeah.
This just question is how much money do you need to get the ball rolling? How many people
Yeah.
do you need to staff this? You know, create the budget, fill in the app, you know, and we'll vote on it once a quarter. And if we've got money in the bank and we think it's a good idea, you know, we'll approve it. And
We
we'll
find
make
those entrepreneurs because nobody's going to sign on for something and start wanting to pay $100 a month too if there aren't entrepreneurs that sign up first.
Yeah, and that's and again that goes to the key of like building around modular business networks, really, because you're building a community of friends, a community of people that want to do this together. They're committed to this idea. They've been sold on it from their friend, and this is how they're gonna get it up and running. And they're also going to be a part of not just this for them, but for them and 9 other groups of people that are in the same boat. And I mean, the math is pretty straightforward. You know, we once a quarter we collect $30,000 from all the members, and then we collectively, all 100 of the members, decide which one, based on the budgets that we have prepared, which one we start next. It's just really simple, I think. Which
It
on one
is.
hand,
Yeah. But yeah, I think that is the next thing, like actionable thing that we need to do is we need to start getting entrepreneurs on board. We need
Yes.
to make those phone calls and talk to them and say, you know, this is the conversation we're having. We're looking for people to sign on. So we are at that point. Like we have theorized the crap out of this. So we need to find those entrepreneurs
and start bringing them
and
in.
get them signed up. Maybe not even officially, but willing to. I'm looking to do this,
Yeah.
and you know, if you know we get whatever, we just we need to find those entrepreneurs.
And one of the things that I got really encouraged, I don't know if you've taken a look at the membership and the 10100 on the Facebook recently, but after the conversation,
I keep getting notifications saying that somebody new wants to join, and I'm like, I'm not the person to be approving that. 'Cause
oh,
don't
I may have
know
accidentally made you a moderator or administrator or something because you were part of the original group of people.
I'm looking at them. I'm like, I don't know who this person is. That was somebody talking to.
Yeah,
Okay.
because you were part of the original group of like 4 or 5 people that I added to the initial group. When I opened it up to make it public, I think I
fair
may have
enough.
made you guys like moderators or something like that.
Okay, that explains that. Because
Yeah.
there are people on there. So I'm guessing you got a bunch of new.
About 20
invites.
people were joined our group after Lauren and I talked last week. So she
Nice.
connected a bunch of people from the was the Sustainability Action Network or something like that. I
Okay.
forget what it was called. It was the Climate Sustainability Network or Health and Action something. Point of the matter is, I wouldn't be surprised at all if you're already a part of it and I've just messed up the acronym. And 20 people from that group came and joined, and obviously none of them joined the Zoom call today. That's fine. I wouldn't expect them to. They're brand new, and we're still a very fledgling community. Which brings up another interesting thing. We're almost reaching the point where we could almost, dare I say, begin to hint and dream of doing an actual in-person meeting. Which
because of things opening up and things being ideally outside, so weather permitting, meet under the like warmth wise, but like meet under the Summerfolk, like meet on the Summerfolk stage or something like that. Or
that's interesting.
Behind it in the backstage area. And just have everybody come and meet there. That's because it's outside and it's the place to meet. I don't know how
conveniently very close for you too.
And it's honestly, that's my go-to place if I tell people to meet me somewhere, because it's nice outside and where can we go, and there's picnic tables. It's just like, it's been my go-to place for so long that's the first place that came to mind.
Sure.
So I mean, there's Harrison Park.
There's the Old Town Hub.
But it's almost like it's usually more occupied. I don't know. You sort of, I don't know if you have to reserve, because Harrison Park is a little bit busier.
Yeah, reservations are definitely a possibility. That's something we can look into going forward, because I don't think we're going to do our first meeting next week, so that's something we can plan for.
No, but honestly, I think it's, yeah, think about that, but I'm still more comfortable doing it online, because I am... Well, because I was mentioning to you that I went and had coffee with a buddy of mine from Toronto who decided halfway through dinner that, I guess I don't have to continue to follow social rules. I didn't know he visited from Toronto, and then I realized, and I was like, oh, freaking crap, okay, stay distant then, actually, make sure, and then he changed, and now I yesterday was the first day where people were saying that, like, you're allowed to hug people within your personal circle. So, but now I have to wait an extra couple weeks to hug my grandma, and she lives on the other side of the house.
Right.
Because of this guy. So, I'm staying in. I'm only going out if I need groceries. Yeah, if I go to a park or something, like, I'm still thinking ride my bike to a cemetery on a warm day, because nobody else is going to be there.
Right.
And I'm not afraid of cemeteries. Like, whatever, they're not getting up. It's fine. And
I mean, at this point, they're pretty much done.
That's how I go. That just means that I'm one of the first ones to go, and I'm on the winning team.
Good times. Well, I think it's almost 11 o'clock, and so we've been going for about an hour and 45 minutes, almost an hour and 50. I feel very good about today's meeting. I'm going to reach out to Sarah and invite her to have a conversation with us, hopefully a part of one of the Monday meetings. And if not, I'll work between us all to work at a time, if something can happen, if you're open to that.
Yeah, I can help you organize the thoughts and write that list of, what we need to know down, kind of thing.
Well, and even to have, like, even to have your voice and perspective in as part of this as well, because, like, I'm always impressed with the caliber of what you bring to the table, so I appreciate it. And I anticipate that Sarah will be operating on a very similar wavelength to ourselves. So this is going to be, I think, overall a positive experience, and that's what I'm going.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And we can get the ball rolling. Because I think we need to take this idea and make it a reality.
Right. And the faster that we can do it, the faster we can fill up that list of 10 businesses with 10 entrepreneurial-minded persons, that and then get them to bring in their friends. Like we'll have 100 people in, I think, very little period of time once we can come up with the people who have a business idea. So yeah.
Get those 10 entrepreneurs, and they can bring some people. But yeah, we need to find those 10 entrepreneurs that are like ready to go.
All
or at
right.
least ready enough to go that they're willing to join a group to sort of like start here, move there, move there, move there. But we need to get them, and we need to get them on board.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, we can just sit here and talk about this till the end of time.
Well, I mean, and here's the other idea. Like, if we can create a template where people can create different business ideas, they can propose different businesses. We can end up with, and this might come to bite us in the ass in a different way, but where we might have like too many businesses to choose from. But it might be interesting to be able to.
That's why we vote.
That's right. That's right. And ratify. And so
that's what democracy is. Everybody has ideas. People vote on ones that they all, majority rules, yada yada yada. That's what we're here for. So
That's right.
I'm not worried about such a thing as too many ideas. We just need to make sure that the people who are bringing the ideas are actually like willing and able to actually put the work in and the time and stuff to actually make them a reality, because I can theorize about a whole bunch of businesses that I have absolutely no intention of bringing to reality. So I'm not one of them. I want my degree.
Right, and you want your time to count for something. Like, I don't want this just to be a whole bunch of hot air. I definitely want this to be something that comes into fruition, because, to be honest, this is my retirement plan.
Yeah. So we definitely find those entrepreneurs. I guess Sarah's the first one.
Sarah is she's not the first entrepreneur that I've considered or thought about, but she's definitely somebody that we are going to connect with this week and sound her out and see what she feels.
Well, she's our first. I mean, the first connection.
Oh yeah.
Because people that you thought about don't count as far as people who signed up.
True. And as far as that goes, we don't have anybody.
Yeah. So that's what we need to do, is take those people from your brain to a page where somebody's actually signed your name and is like, call me.
I would say Lauren might represent the first potential outside idea, beyond the ones that we've spitballed on one of these like 10-100 conversations.
Yeah.
That has sort of come to the conversation and say, yeah, I've got this business idea. And I'd be like, great. Let's see how that would fit in with our philosophy and our environment and how we can make it work. And then we did. It was wonderful. My goodness. More, please.
I was also wondering,
yeah.
And this was a thought of mine, I was talking about saving the, and I am still considering that seriously, saving the courthouse.
Yeah.
But an alternative to to the jail part being turned into a hostel, because that also works. But turned into a Buddhist retreat.
Okay. Yeah.
Because Owen Sound doesn't have a Buddhist temple. So
I'm imagining
Buddhists don't need much. Somebody who wants to live the monastic kind of lifestyle, they have a small bag. They have they just want a small room. We still have to obviously get rid of mold and asbestos and stuff, but it's a place where they can come in and they also work to bring it up and things like that, and then they come to meditate, and that's something that we can then expand to the community, so we can take in people that if somebody is dealing with mental illness and that's part of the reason that they're homeless. It's something where it's the mindfulness exercises, you can invite them in. They don't have to become monks and nuns, but they can get up, meditate with everybody else, and sort of join the lifestyle as a retreat to maybe help them get their head in shape and maybe, get some stuff together for trial periods and be okay, and then how can we sort of help you work towards, re-entering and finding a home and things like that.
Well,
or they can rent a small space if they decide that they want to continue living with the monks or something like that. But it's something that if it becomes, and I don't know how to do that because I'd have to talk to somebody who knows how to maneuver that stuff. But Owen Sound is increasingly, there's a lot more Buddhists in Owen Sound than I realized.
Yeah.
And like
I'm picturing the evangelical protests backlash. Mmm, delicious.
right. It's like we're Buddhists. We're literally we sit a lot. That's what we do. We're not gonna turn your kids into Satan worshipping demon children that eat babies.
I mean,
We just sit a lot.
of course, you know their response is going to be like, "Well, you don't think that you are."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like literally Buddhists, you can define, like, there's a lot going on inside the brains of a Buddhist, but as far as the outside world needs to be concerned, they're people who sit a lot.
Yep. Yep.
I mean, that's
Too true. But I'm gonna nip this particular
yeah,
rabbit trail.
I gotta go. I gotta make some dinner, and Juliet's gonna want her dinner.
Absolutely. So, to anyone who's managed to watch this far, this is just your quick reminder and affirmation that you are, in fact, indeed, are awesome. And an invitation to come back next week at 5 o'clock on a Monday when we have the conversation about the TEM 100 and how we're going to get this up and off the ground in the Grey Bruce area. Until then, we'll see you guys in the future. And don't forget, you're awesome.
One of us. Google gobble.
Google gobble.